I never believed in coincidences until the morning I found myself standing over a dying creature from another world, its luminescent blood soaking into the desert sand like liquid starlight. The sun was barely breaking over the horizon when I saw the trail of smoke rising from beyond the ridge, a thin black line cutting through the pink and gold of dawn, and something in my chest pulled me toward it with a force I couldn't name or resist. I should have called someone, should have turned back to my truck and driven straight to the authorities, but my feet carried me forward as if guided by invisible hands, as if every step of my life had been leading me to this exact moment in this vast and empty place. The air smelled of scorched metal and something else, something sweet and otherworldly, like incense burning in a cathedral I'd never entered but somehow remembered. When I crested the ridge and saw the craft half buried in the sand, its surface shimmering with colors that don't exist in our spectrum, I felt my knees buckle, not from fear, but from recognition, as though my soul was waking from a sleep that had lasted my entire existence. The crash site was small, almost intimate, nothing like the massive destruction I'd imagined from movies and stories, and scattered around it were fragments of material that seemed to shift between solid and liquid, between metal and light. I approached slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs, my breath coming in short gasps, and that's when I heard it, a sound that was part whimper, part song, part prayer, spoken in a language my ears couldn't understand, but my spirit somehow did. And then I saw it, half hidden behind a twisted piece of the hull, and my entire understanding of reality shattered like glass. The being was humanoid, but unmistakably not human, its limbs too long and elegant, its skin translucent and faintly glowing, with an inner light that pulsed in rhythm with what I could only assume was a heartbeat. Its face was beautiful in a way that made me want to weep, with features that were both alien and achingly familiar, as if I were looking at a distant relative from a branch of the family tree that stretched beyond Earth and into the stars themselves. But it was the eyes that undid me completely, large and dark, and filled with such raw terror and desperate pleading that I forgot everything I'd ever been taught about caution and self-preservation. Those eyes locked onto mine, and in that instant I felt a connection snap into place like a circuit completing, a recognition that went deeper than memory, deeper than flesh and bone. The creature was wounded, its side torn open and leaking that strange, luminous fluid, and it was struggling to breathe, each inhalation a labored gasp that seemed to shake its entire frame. I dropped to my knees beside it without thinking, my hands hovering over its body, unsure where to touch, how to help, whether my very presence might cause more harm. But then it reached up with fingers that were too long and too delicate, and it grasped my wrist with surprising strength, and the world exploded into light and sound and sensation that wasn't coming through my physical senses at all. Images flooded my mind. Not words, not pictures exactly, but pure meaning transmitted directly into my consciousness, and I understood that this being was not my enemy, not a threat to be feared, but something precious and sacred, a messenger whose survival suddenly felt more important than my own. The vision it showed me was crystal clear despite the chaos of the moment. A structure hidden in the mountains to the north, an old military installation I'd heard rumors about but never believed actually existed, sealed and forgotten by everyone, except apparently this dying visitor from the stars. I saw the route we needed to take, felt the urgency pulsing through the telepathic link, understood without being told that this place represented safety, healing, answers to questions I hadn't known I was asking. The alien released my wrist and tried to stand, its movements weak and uncoordinated, and I found myself moving without conscious decision, slipping my arm around its torso, taking its weight against my shoulder, feeling the strange coolness of its skin through my shirt. It was lighter than I expected, as if its bones were hollow like a bird's, and when it leaned against me, I felt that inexplicable bond strengthen, that sense of rightness and purpose that I'd been searching for my entire life without knowing what I was looking for. We began to move away from the crash site, our steps slow and stumbling, and I glanced back once to see the craft beginning to dissolve, its material breaking down into particles that scattered on the desert wind like seeds or souls returning to their source. The sun climbed higher, painting the landscape in shades of amber and rust, and I understood with absolute certainty that nothing in my life would ever be ordinary again, that I was walking into a mystery that would reshape not just my understanding of the universe, but my understanding of God, of purpose, of why we're here at all. As we crossed that barren landscape together, this child of the stars and this simple human who'd stumbled into divine appointment, I felt something ancient stirring in my chest, something that had been dormant and waiting for exactly this moment to awaken. The alien's breathing steadied slightly as we found our rhythm, moving as one being, and through the telepathic connection still humming between us, I sensed its gratitude, its relief, and underneath it all, a profound love that seemed to encompass not just me but all of humanity, all of creation. Every difficult step felt like prayer, every moment of doubt washed away by an overwhelming sense that we were not alone in this vast universe, that we had never been alone, that watching over us since the very beginning had been intelligences filled with compassion and purpose. The mountains loomed ahead, dark and ancient, holding secrets that had been buried deliberately, waiting for the right person at the right time to uncover them. My legs ached, my shoulders burned from supporting the alien's weight, but I pushed forward with determination, born not from my own strength, but from something flowing into me through our connection, a power that felt both completely foreign and utterly familiar. The wind picked up, carrying sand and whispers, and what might have been the echo of angelic voices, or might have been just the sound of my own. Transformation beginning. And as we approached the hidden entrance to that abandoned bunker, I realized I was no longer afraid. I was chosen, I was ready, and I was about to discover truths that would bridge heaven and earth in ways that would change everything. The terrain grew harsher with every mile, transforming from flat desert into rocky inclines that tore at my boots and tested every ounce of strength I had left in my body. The alien sagged heavier against me as its energy waned, and I felt its pain rippling through our connection like waves of heat and cold that had nothing to do with physical temperature and everything to do with the dimming of something essential and sacred. I whispered reassurances I wasn't sure it could hear through conventional means, telling it to hold on, telling it we were close, though I had no real way of knowing if that was true or just desperate hope masquerading as faith. The sun climbed to its zenith and beat down on us without mercy, and my mouth grew dry as dust, my vision blurring at the edges from exhaustion and dehydration, and the sheer impossibility of what I was attempting. But each time I considered stopping, each time my body screamed for rest, another wave of images would flood my consciousness from the alien's mind, showing me that bunker entrance with increasing clarity and urgency, showing me what waited inside if we could only reach it in time. I saw technology that gleamed like captured starlight, chambers that hummed with power older than human civilization, and beneath it all a purpose so profound that my heart ached with the beauty of it. This being I carried was not just a refugee from a distant world, but an emissary of something vast and intentional, part of a cosmic design that included humanity not as an accident, but as beloved children with a destiny we'd barely begun to comprehend. Through our telepathic link, I felt the alien's memories bleeding into mine, visions of other worlds where beings looked to the same stars and wondered about the same creator, where different forms of life sang, praises in languages of light and frequency that transcended words, but carried the same essential truth. And I understood in that moment that God's creation was far more magnificent than any single planet or species could contain. that the universe itself was a cathedral built to demonstrate infinite love through infinite variety. The mountains rose before us like ancient sentinels, their faces scarred by millennia of wind and weather, and I could feel the alien's excitement mixing with its pain as we drew closer to our destination. My legs trembled with each step up the rocky slope, my lungs burning as the altitude increased and the air thinned. But the telepathic connection between us had become something more than communication now. It had become a lifeline, flowing both directions, my determination sustaining the alien, even as its otherworldly resilience sustained me beyond what should have been humanly possible. I sensed things through our bond that I had no framework to understand fully, glimpses of vast distances traveled. Not just through space, but through dimensions that folded reality in ways that made my mind reel and my spirit soar simultaneously. The alien showed me flashes of Earth as seen from orbit, our blue jewel spinning in the darkness, and I felt its species' love for our world, their patient watching and careful guidance across the centuries, their grief when we suffered and their joy when we reached toward the light. These beings had walked among us in our most sacred moments, I suddenly knew, not as gods themselves, but as servants of the one true God. As angels might appear in forms we could comprehend, as bridges between the divine intention and human understanding. The revelation struck me with such force that I stumbled, nearly dropping to my knees. But the alien steadied me with unexpected strength, and I felt its gratitude washing over me like warm water, felt it recognizing something in me that I'd never recognized in myself. We crested a ridge, and there before us, half hidden by scrub brush and decades of neglect, stood a rusted metal door set directly into the mountain face, exactly as the visions had shown me, exactly where hope had promised it would be. I guided us toward that entrance with renewed energy born from relief and wonder, my free hand reaching out to touch the door's surface, finding it cold and solid and completely sealed with no visible mechanism for opening. The alien lifted its head, and I saw its eyes focusing with effort, saw determination burning through the haze of pain and exhaustion that clouded its features. It raised one long, delicate hand and placed it flat against the metal, and I watched in breathless awe as symbols began to appear under its palm, glowing with soft golden light that spread across the door in intricate patterns that looked like circuit boards. And ancient hieroglyphs and angelic script all merged into one impossible language. The symbols pulsed in rhythm with the alien's heartbeat, responding to something in its biology or consciousness or soul, and I heard mechanisms grinding deep within the mountain, locks disengaging that had been sealed since before I was born, since before my parents were born, since a time when this installation served purposes that had been deliberately forgotten by those who built it. The door shuddered and began to slide open with a groan of protesting metal, revealing darkness beyond that smelled of stale air, and machine oil and something else, something that made the hair on my arms stand up with recognition that this place was holy ground in ways that had nothing to do with denomination or doctrine and everything to do with truth. The alien turned its face toward me, and through our connection I felt its message clear as spoken words, felt it, telling me that what waited inside would challenge everything I thought I knew about history and faith and God's methods of reaching his children. I nodded my understanding and my acceptance, and together we stepped across that threshold into darkness that somehow felt like coming home, into mystery that felt like answered prayer, into a moment that would divide my life forever into before and after. The passage descended steeply into the heart of the mountain, lit now by the same golden symbols that had appeared on the door, glowing softly along the walls, as if the alien's presence activated them, as if the entire facility had been waiting in slumber for exactly this visitor to return and wake it from its long sleep. We moved slowly down the corridor, the alien leaning heavily on me but guiding our direction with gentle pressure and telepathic nudges, leading us deeper into this impossible place that should not exist, and yet felt more real than anything I'd ever encountered. I could feel the weight of stone above us, could sense vast spaces opening ahead, and my heart raced with anticipation and holy fear, the kind of fear that has nothing to do with danger and everything to do with standing in the presence of something infinitely greater than yourself. The alien's breathing had grown steadier now that we were inside, as if the very atmosphere of this place was medicinal to its kind, and I felt hope blooming in my chest, hope that we'd made it in time, hope that this being would survive to deliver whatever message it carried. Through our bond, I sensed its relief and its purpose crystallizing into something I could almost grasp, almost understand, a truth about humanity's place in God's vast creation that was about to be revealed in ways that would honor both science and scripture, both reason and faith. We emerged from the narrow passage into a chamber so vast that my mind struggled to accept its dimensions, filled with technology that gleamed despite decades of abandonment. And I knew with absolute certainty that I was standing at the intersection of heaven and earth, about to witness divine truth clothed in unexpected form, about to understand that God's love reaches farther than we ever dared imagine. The chamber stretched before us like the interior of a cathedral designed by minds that understood dimensions beyond our three, its walls rising into shadows that seemed to curve impossibly upward, and I felt my breath catch in my throat as I tried to comprehend the sheer scale of what human hands could never have built alone. The alien guided me forward across a floor that gleamed like polished obsidian, each step echoing in the vast space, and I noticed that my companion's movements had become less labored now, as if the very air in this place carried healing properties that worked on biology I couldn't begin to understand. Through our telepathic connection, I felt waves of emotion flowing from the alien's consciousness into mine, gratitude mixed with sorrow, hope tangled with urgent purpose, and beneath it all a love so profound and unconditional that I recognized it immediately as the same love I'd felt in my deepest prayers, the same presence I'd sensed in moments of worship when the veil between human and divine grew thin. The alien stopped in the center of the chamber and turned to face me fully for the first time since we'd met, its large eyes reflecting the golden glow of symbols that now pulsed rhythmically along every surface, and I saw in those eyes not just intelligence but wisdom, not just consciousness but soul, not just alien otherness but kinship that transcended species and spoke to something eternal we shared. I felt the alien's mind opening to mine with deliberate intention now, no longer just sharing urgent flashes of direction and need, but inviting me into deeper chambers of understanding, showing me memories that stretched back through centuries of Earth's history with a clarity that made my knees weak and my heart thunder in my chest. I saw these beings walking among humans in ancient times, their true forms concealed by technology or divine permission, appearing as travelers and teachers and sometimes as figures of light that inspired our ancestors to build temples and write scriptures and reach toward heaven with trembling hands and hopeful hearts. They had been present at moments I recognized from sacred texts, standing in the shadows when prophets received visions, watching from distances when miracles unfolded, never interfering with human free will, but gently guiding, carefully nurturing, patiently protecting the fragile flame of consciousness that God had planted in our species with such love and such hopes for what we might become. The aliens showed me that they were not gods themselves, and never claimed to be, but servants of the one true Creator who made all things, agents of divine will, working across countless worlds to help younger species find their way toward light and truth and love. I saw that their technology and their spirituality were not separate things, but unified expressions of the same reality, that understanding the mechanics of creation only deepened Their worship of the one who set those mechanics in motion, that science and faith were always meant to be two languages describing the same magnificent truth. Tears streamed down my face as the revelations continued, as I understood that humanity's story of divine encounter was real and true, and even more wonderful than we'd imagined, because God's love was so vast that it included other children, other species, other worlds, all held in the same eternal embrace. The alien placed both hands gently on either side of my head, and I felt no fear, only overwhelming peace as our connection deepened further, and I saw Earth from their perspective, saw how precious we are, how carefully we've been watched over, how many times unseen hands guided us away from disasters we never knew threatened us. They had inspired our scientists and our saints, I suddenly understood, speaking to both in the languages they could hear, showing formulae to one and visions to another. Because all truth comes from the same source, and God delights in every path we take toward understanding His creation. I saw Jesus through their eyes, and the love and reverence they held for Him staggered me, saw that His message of love and redemption resonated across galaxies, that His sacrifice had meaning beyond Earth's boundaries, that the incarnation of God in human form was an event that rippled through dimensions these beings could perceive, but I could barely imagine. The alien showed me that they had watched that ministry with awe, had witnessed the resurrection with joy, had understood it as the moment when the barrier between heaven and earth grew thinner for all beings everywhere, when love conquered death, not just philosophically, but actually physically, eternally. The telepathic flow began to gentle, and the alien lowered its hands, but the connection between us remained warm and strong, and I understood that something permanent had changed in me, that I had been opened to frequencies of reality I could never fully close off again, nor would I ever want to. The alien's form was strengthening visibly now, color returning to its skin, light brightening in its eyes, and through our bond I felt its gratitude toward me personally, felt it showing me that my choice to help a stranger, to show compassion without demanding explanation or proof of worthiness, had activated something dormant in my own soul, had marked me as one who could bridge worlds. I tried to speak aloud for the first time since entering this chamber, my voice cracking with emotion as I asked the question burning in my heart, asking why they remained hidden, why they didn't reveal themselves to everyone, if their intentions were pure and their message true. The alien's response flooded through me, without words, showing me that humanity must choose freely to seek truth, that forced revelation creates compliance, but not genuine faith, that we are in a process of awakening that cannot be rushed without damaging the very consciousness it seeks to elevate. I understood then that people like me were being found and awakened individually, prepared to help others bridge the gap between the world we thought we knew and the infinitely larger reality that God's love encompasses, prepared to testify that faith and wonder can coexist, that the universe being vast and populated doesn't diminish Christ's message, but amplifies it into a cosmic song of redemption that includes all creation. The alien moved toward a section of the chamber where the crystalline structures grew denser and more intricate, forming what looked like a console or altar of sorts, its surfaces covered in geometric patterns that shifted and breathed with inner light that seemed almost alive. I followed without hesitation, drawn by something deeper than a curiosity, feeling as though every step I'd taken in my entire life had been leading me toward this exact moment in this impossible place beneath the Earth's surface. The alien gestured for me to stand beside it, and as I took my position, I felt the temperature around us change subtly, felt the air itself begin to hum with energy that raised the hair on my arms and made my skin tingle with anticipation, mixed with a fear that wasn't quite fear, but rather the trembling you feel in the presence of something holy. Through our connection, I sensed the alien's intention before it acted, understood that what it was about to show me would change everything I thought I knew about God's relationship with His creation and I braced myself even as I leaned forward, hungry for truth, no matter how it might shatter my old understanding. The alien placed both hands on the crystalline surface, and the entire console erupted with light, not harsh or blinding, but warm and golden like sunrise, and suddenly the space above it filled with images that hung in the air like windows into other times and places, like memories made visible and solid enough to almost touch. The first vision showed Earth as it must have looked thousands of years ago, primitive and beautiful, and I saw these beings descending from the heavens in vessels that ancient humans would have described as chariots of fire or pillars of cloud, because they had no other vocabulary for what they witnessed. I watched as the aliens walked among our ancestors with patient kindness, teaching agriculture and mathematics and astronomy, not doing the work for us, but showing us how to do it ourselves, respecting our agency even when our progress must have seemed painfully slow to their advanced minds. Through the telepathic link, I felt the alien explaining without words that God had created humanity with specific purpose, had planted in us the capacity for love and creativity and spiritual growth, but had also assigned these elder species to serve as guides and guardians, to protect us from threats beyond our understanding, while we developed, to ensure we survived long enough to mature into what we were meant to become. I saw that this wasn't interference with divine plan, but rather the implementation of it, that God's providence often works through instruments and agents, that angels themselves might take more forms than we'd imagined in our limited theology. The visions shifted, and I gasped as I recognized scenes from Scripture made suddenly more complex and more wonderful, saw the pillar of fire leading the Israelites through the wilderness, and understood it had been both miracle and ship, both divine intervention and these beings following God's direct command to preserve his chosen people. My hands were shaking as I gripped the edge of the console, tears blurring my vision as I watched prophets receiving visions that came through technology so advanced it was indistinguishable from pure spiritual experience. Understanding now that God can speak through any means he chooses, and that limiting him to only the methods we find comfortable is itself a kind of faithlessness. I saw Ezekiel's wheel within a wheel and understood what he had actually witnessed, saw the glory that had overwhelmed him, and knew that his description had been accurate, even if our interpretations had been too small and too earthbound. The alien showed me moment after moment when heaven and earth intersected, when the veil grew thin, and in every case these beings had been present not as gods, but as servants, not as objects of worship, but as fellow worshippers pointing humanity always toward the one true Creator. Then the visions shifted to show me Jesus, and I actually cried out, because the love that flooded through our connection was so intense, it felt like my heart might burst. Felt the alien's entire being resonate with reverence and awe as it showed me that they had watched his ministry from careful distances, had witnessed miracles that confirmed what they already knew about God's power and love, had seen in Christ the ultimate revelation that God loves his creation enough to enter it personally, to suffer with us, to die for us, to bridge the gap between human and divine in the most intimate and costly way imaginable. The final visions showed me humanity's future possibilities branching out like roads diverging, some leading to destruction through fear and hatred and pride, others leading to transformation and unity and partnership with these cosmic siblings who had been watching over us with such patience and hope. I understood then that we stood at a threshold moment in our species' development, that we were being prepared for contact and communion with a larger community of conscious beings, but that we had to choose it freely, had to grow into it through our own spiritual and ethical maturation rather than having it forced upon us before we were ready. The alien turned to look at me directly, and I felt its message crystallize into something like words in my mind, heard it telling me that God's love is infinite and includes all his children across all worlds, that Jesus' message of redemption and reconciliation applies to the entire cosmos, that I had been chosen to receive this knowledge because my heart was ready to hold it without breaking, ready to bridge the gap between faith and discovery, ready to tell others that the universe being vast and populated doesn't diminish God's love, but reveals its magnificent scope. The visions faded slowly, and I stood there, trembling, forever changed, knowing that I could never return to smaller understandings, knowing that I had been entrusted with truth that was both terrifying and wonderful, knowing that God's plan was larger and stranger and more beautiful than any of us had dared to imagine. We descended deeper into the earth through corridors that felt less like human construction and more like organic pathways carved by intention rather than machinery. The walls smooth and curved, as though shaped by hands that understood geometry on a level beyond our mathematics. The alien moved ahead of me with increasing difficulty, its steps faltering every few meters, and I stayed close enough to catch it if it fell, my hand hovering near its shoulder as our breathing echoed in the enclosed space that seemed to swallow sound and reshape it into something almost musical. The air grew warmer as we went down, not uncomfortably so, but with a quality that felt alive somehow, charged with energy that made my fingertips tingle and my thoughts sharpen to unusual clarity, as though I was becoming more awake with every step. Through the telepathic connection that had grown stronger between us, I sensed the alien's relief mixed with urgency, understood that we were close to something vitally important, something it desperately needed if it was going to survive. The darkness should have been absolute this far, underground, but instead a faint luminescence emanated from the walls themselves, pale blue and steady, revealing enough to navigate by while leaving the depths ahead shrouded in mystery. I found myself holding my breath as we rounded a final corner, and the corridor opened suddenly into a space so vast that my mind struggled to comprehend it. Chamber that stretched in all directions far beyond what should have been possible beneath these mountains. My footsteps stopped without conscious decision as I stood at the threshold staring, trying to process what my eyes reported while my brain insisted it couldn't be real, couldn't exist here in the hidden depths where no one had walked for longer than I could imagine. The chamber was filled with structures that defied easy description, crystalline formations that grew from floor and ceiling like frozen gardens of light, geometric shapes that interlocked in patterns that hurt to follow with your eyes because they seemed to shift dimensionally when you weren't looking directly at them. Technology and something like nature had merged here into forms that were both mathematical precision and organic beauty, machines that breathed or plants that calculated, the distinction meaningless in the face of engineering philosophy so advanced it had transcended our categories entirely. Pillars rose toward the distant ceiling carved with symbols I couldn't read, but that triggered something deep in my unconscious mind, recognition without understanding, as though my soul knew this language even if my intellect did not. The alien gestured for me to follow, and we moved into the chamber proper, walking between structures that hummed with dormant power, and I realized that everything here was waiting, had been waiting perhaps for centuries or longer, preserved perfectly in this sealed environment for purposes I was only beginning to guess at. Holographic displays flickered to life as we passed, responding to the alien's presence like flowers, turning towards sunlight, showing diagrams and star charts and images of beings I didn't recognize from worlds I'd never imagined. I felt tears on my face without remembering when I'd started crying, overwhelmed by the beauty and strangeness of it all, by the sudden expansion of my understanding about what was possible, about how much had been hidden just beneath the surface of the world I thought I knew. The alien paused in the center of the chamber and turned to face me, and through our connection I felt it asking if I understood, if I grasped what this place represented, and I nodded slowly because I did understand, even if I couldn't have put it into words. This was a sanctuary and a staging ground, a place built by beings who had watched over humanity. Since before our recorded history began, who had preserved knowledge and tools here against the day when we would be ready to receive them. The technology surrounding us wasn't meant to replace faith, but to reveal how God's providence operates through countless instruments across scales we could barely fathom, how the divine and the physical were never truly separate except in our limited perception. I walked slowly to one of the crystalline structures and reached out tentatively, half expecting to be stopped. But the alien made no move to prevent me, and my fingers touched cool, smooth surface that immediately warmed under my hand and lit from within with golden light. Images flooded my not invasively but gently, showing me glimpses of Earth from orbit, showing me moments throughout history when disaster had been quietly averted by intervention we never knew occurred, showing me that we had never been alone even in our darkest hours. I understood then with certainty that shook me to my core that God's love manifests in ways both miraculous and practical, that heaven's concern for us includes both eternal souls and physical survival, that these beings had been placed here by divine appointment to serve as guardians and guides. The chamber itself felt sacred, not because it was religious in the conventional sense, but because it was dedicated to holy purpose, because every structure and system here existed. To the alien moved with renewed purpose toward the center of the chamber, where a massive crystalline console rose from the floor like a tree of light, its branches spreading upward in fractal patterns that seemed to extend into dimensions my eyes couldn't quite track. It placed both hands on the surface, and the entire structure blazed with brilliance that forced me to shield my eyes. And when I could look again, the air above the console had transformed into a living canvas, where images appeared with such clarity and depth they seemed more real than memories. I stepped closer, drawn by irresistible curiosity, and found myself standing before a holographic display that showed Earth as it had been thousands of years ago. Continents arranged differently, civilizations rising in places I didn't recognize from any history book I'd ever read. The alien's presence touched my mind gently, and I understood it was offering to show me truth that had been hidden, asking permission to reshape my understanding of everything I thought I knew about humanity's journey. I nodded, because what else could I do? Because I had come too far to turn away now, and the images shifted, flowing like water through time, showing me scenes that made my breath catch and my heart pound against my ribs. I watched as beings like my companion walked among humans. In ancient cities, their appearance slightly different than it was now, adapted somehow to seem less foreign to eyes that didn't yet understand the cosmos beyond their own skies. They moved through marketplaces and temples, not as conquerors or gods demanding worship, but as teachers and healers, sharing knowledge about agriculture and astronomy, about mathematics and medicine, about how to build societies that honored both individual dignity and collective well-being. The hologram zoomed closer, and I saw one of these beings sitting with a group of children, teaching them to read the stars, saw another helping to deliver a baby in a modest home, while family members watched with gratitude and wonder. Through the telepathic link, I felt the alien's emotion as it showed me these memories, a profound love for humanity that transcended species and time, a dedication to our flourishing that had persisted across generations of their kind who had chosen this guardianship as their sacred calling. I understood then that these encounters had been interpreted by our ancestors through the lens of their own understanding, that many of the angels and messengers described in ancient texts might have been exactly these beings, that divine providence had always worked through both supernatural and physical means. The images continued showing me moments of crisis when humanity stood at the edge of Self-destruction and quiet interventions had guided us back from the brink, showing me prophets and mystics who had received visions that were perhaps both divine inspiration and carefully shared knowledge from watchers who understood what we needed to survive our own growing pains. I saw a figure that might have been Abraham looking up at stars, while a luminous presence spoke to him about destiny and covenant, saw Moses on a mountain summit, surrounded by light that could have been holy fire or advanced technology, or both simultaneously, because perhaps those categories were never meant to be separate. I saw moments from the life of Jesus, and my breath stopped entirely because the holograms showed him teaching and healing with beings like my companion, watching from the edges of crowds, never interfering but present, bearing witness to the incarnation of divinity that was utterly unique and supremely important. The alien's thoughts pressed gently into mine, making sure I understood that Jesus was exactly who the Scriptures proclaimed, that his divinity was absolute and his sacrifice unrepeatable, but that God's love for humanity had always expressed itself through multiple channels, including these faithful servants who had been appointed as guardians. The holographic display expanded, showing me that this pattern continued throughout history and across cultures, that these beings had walked beside humanity during our darkest hours and our greatest achievements, that they had wept when we suffered and rejoiced when we grew in wisdom and compassion. I saw them present but hidden during the building of great temples and hospitals, during the composition of sacred music and the discovery of medicines, during moments of reconciliation between enemies and the liberation of the oppressed from bondage. Through the images and the aliens' telepathic guidance, I finally grasped the magnificent scope of God's design, how the Creator had established both spiritual and cosmic orders that worked in harmony, how these beings served the same divine will that had spoken reality into existence and become flesh to redeem us. The chamber itself seemed to pulse with affirmation as I stood weeping before the console, overwhelmed by the recognition that we had never been abandoned, that heaven's attention had always been upon us, working through means, both miraculous and practical, to guide us toward our intended destiny as beloved children meant for communion with the infinite. The hologram shifted again, and I found myself witnessing the moment when one of these beings stood in the shadows of Gethsemane, watching as Jesus prayed alone in his agony before the crucifixion, and I could feel through the telepathic link how this alien observer had wept with such profound grief that its entire body had trembled with the weight of what was unfolding. The image showed the being reaching out as if wanting to intervene, to spare the Son of God from what was coming, but holding back because it understood with absolute clarity that this sacrifice was the hinge upon which all of creation turned, that this was the moment when divine love would conquer death itself through willing submission to death's worst cruelty. I watched as the being fell to its knees in the garden's outer darkness, hands pressed to the earth in a posture of worship and surrender, bearing witness to the most sacred hours in human history, while angels themselves attended to Christ in his human suffering. Through my companion's memories, I felt the cosmic significance of that night, how all of heaven held its breath, how these faithful guardians understood they were watching their Creator submit to the limitations and pains of the flesh he had assumed out of infinite love for creatures who had rebelled against him. And the reverence in that understanding was so overwhelming I could barely remain standing. The scenes continued flowing forward through time, and I saw these beings present in the upper room where the disciples gathered after the resurrection, not visible to human eyes, but there nonetheless, rejoicing with inexpressible joy as they witnessed the vindication of everything they had been promised. The proof that death had been defeated and the gates of heaven thrown open to all who would believe. I watched as they followed the apostles on their missionary journeys, protecting them from dangers they never knew existed, guiding them toward divine appointments that would change the course of Nations, weeping when martyrs gave their lives, and celebrating when the gospel took root in new soil among new peoples who heard the good news for the first time. The hologram showed me a continuity of purpose that stretched from Eden to the present day, a divine strategy that employed both supernatural intervention and these physical beings who served as instruments of providence. And I finally understood that God's sovereignty was so vast and intricate that it could work through angels and aliens alike, through miracles and natural law, through scripture and starlight, all of it converging toward the singular goal of drawing humanity back into relationship with our Creator. My companion's thoughts whispered into my consciousness with gentle insistence, making sure I grasped that these beings had no power of their own except what had been delegated to them, that they were servants and not saviors, witnesses to redemption but never its source. The crystalline console pulsed with golden light, and new images emerged showing me moments I recognized from Scripture, but now understood with additional dimensions of meaning, showing me Daniel in the lion's den, with one of these beings standing guard over him through the night, showing me the Hebrew children in the fiery furnace with a fourth figure whose appearance was like the Son of God, but accompanied by watchers who marveled at the miracle unfolding before them. I saw Elijah being fed by ravens, while one of these guardians ensured the birds found him in his hiding place, saw Esther preparing to risk her life for her people, while unseen helpers arranged circumstances in the palace to favor her courage, and through each vision I felt my understanding expand, like a room whose walls kept moving outward to accommodate more light than I had ever imagined possible. The alien's presence in my mind grew warmer, and I sensed its deep satisfaction that I was receiving these revelations without losing faith, that I was able to hold both the supernatural and the physical in tension without needing to diminish. Either that I was beginning to see how God's methodology was far more creative and comprehensive than any human theology had fully captured. These beings had been part of the story all along, I realized, mentioned in ancient texts as watchers and messengers and sons of God, sometimes misunderstood and mythologized, but always present, always faithful to their commission to serve humanity's journey toward our divine destiny. The final images showed me the present moment and the future that stood poised before us like a doorway we had not yet chosen to walk through. And I saw humanity at a crossroads where we would either embrace our cosmic context and our spiritual calling simultaneously or fracture into factions that could not reconcile science with faith, that could not accept that God's creation was far larger and stranger than we had dared to believe. I watched projections of possible futures where people like me who had received these revelations would serve as bridges between worlds and worldviews, helping others understand that discovering we are not alone in the universe only magnifies the glory of the God who created such abundance, that meeting beings from other worlds does not diminish Christ's unique divinity, but rather demonstrates how far the Father's love extends throughout the cosmos. He spoke into being. My companion turned to face me fully, and I felt its hope radiating through our connection, its belief that humanity was ready for this expansion of understanding, that we could mature into a species that honored both our spiritual heritage and our cosmic citizenship without betraying either. The hologram faded and the chamber fell into softer light, and I stood there with tears streaming down my face, forever changed by what I had witnessed, by the recognition that we are surrounded by love that works through more channels than we ever imagined, all of it flowing from the same divine source, all of it pointing us toward home. The alien moved toward the healing chamber with slow, deliberate steps, each movement still, labored but filled with purpose, and as it crossed the threshold of the cylindrical structure, the air itself seemed to respond with a low, harmonic frequency that I felt resonate in my chest, like the deepest note of an organ echoing through a cathedral. Light cascaded down from unseen sources above, wrapping around my companion's wounded form in ribbons of luminescence that shifted through colors I had no names for. Hues that existed somewhere between gold and silver, between sunrise and starlight, and I watched in breathless wonder as the injuries that had seemed so dire began to knit themselves back together with visible precision. The being's breathing steadied and deepened, the trembling in its limbs subsided, and through our telepathic connection, I felt the pain that had been a constant background noise in its consciousness finally begin to recede, like a tide pulling back from a shore. What struck me most profoundly was not just the technological marvel of the healing itself, but the reverence with which the chamber operated, as if the very process of restoration was an act of worship, a reflection of the divine power that knits our bodies together in our mother's womb and numbers every hair on our heads. I found myself whispering a prayer of thanksgiving without even deciding to do so, the words rising from somewhere deeper than conscious thought, gratitude, pouring out of me for this being's survival and for the privilege of witnessing such a miracle of mercy made manifest through means I could barely comprehend. When the healing cycle completed and the light faded to a gentle glow, my companion stepped out of the chamber and turned to face me with eyes that now shone with restored vitality and something else, something that looked unmistakably like gratitude mixed with a profound recognition that made my breath catch in my throat. Through the telepathic link, I felt its appreciation wash over me in waves of warmth, not just for the physical assistance I had provided in helping it reach safety, but for something far more significant that I was only beginning to understand as it shared deeper layers of meaning with me in rapid succession. The alien showed me images of my own life as it had been observing me, not with intrusion, but with the gentle watchfulness of a shepherd checking on a particular lamb in the flock. And I saw moments I had forgotten or dismissed, times when I had chosen compassion over convenience, when I had extended mercy to those who could offer me nothing in return, when I had listened to the quiet prompting of the Holy Spirit and obeyed even when it made no logical sense. In each of these moments, I saw now through my companion's perspective how light had flickered within me, how something dormant in my soul had been gradually awakening through each small act of love, each decision to place another's need above my own comfort, and the alien conveyed to me with gentle certainty that these choices had not been coincidental or unnoticed, but had been the very preparation that made this encounter possible. The being reached out and placed its hand over my heart with a touch so gentle it felt like a blessing. And through that physical connection, the telepathic communication intensified into crystal clarity as it showed me what I represented in the larger pattern of divine purpose unfolding across the earth in this critical hour of human history. I saw others like me, scattered across continents and cultures, people who had been quietly cultivated through their life experiences to possess both deep faith and open minds, hearts that loved Jesus with unshakable devotion while also embracing the possibility that God's creation was far vaster and more wondrous than our ancestors could have articulated. We were bridges, the alien explained, positioned by Providence to help humanity navigate the revelation that was coming, when the reality of life beyond Earth would become undeniable and millions would struggle to reconcile their faith with expanded cosmic awareness, needing guides who could testify that there was no contradiction, that the God who created the heavens and all their hosts was faithful to reveal himself through whatever means would draw his children closer to truth. The alien showed me that my compassion today had been a test and a key simultaneously, that by choosing to help a suffering being despite its otherness, I had demonstrated the very Christ-like love that qualified me to carry this message forward, and that something within my spiritual DNA had been activated through this encounter that would enable me to speak with authority born not from study, but from experience. My companion withdrew its hand, and I felt the physical distance return between us, even as the telepathic connection remained warm and steady. And in that moment I understood with sudden clarity that I had been chosen not because I was special or superior, but because I had been willing, because I had cultivated a heart soft enough to recognize divine orchestration even in the most unexpected circumstances. The alien communicated one final thought that settled into my consciousness like a seed planted in fertile ground, showing me that throughout history, God had always prepared people in hidden ways for public purposes, that Noah was trained in faithfulness through years of obedient construction before the flood came, that Moses spent decades in the wilderness before leading the Exodus, that the disciples followed Jesus in obscurity before being sent out to transform the world. I was part of that same pattern, the being assured me, shaped through circumstances I had not understood at the time, but which now revealed themselves as intentional preparation for a role in the great awakening that was beginning to unfold across humanity, and my willingness to embrace both the strangeness of this encounter and the familiar truth of God's love was precisely the combination of qualities that would be needed in the days ahead. The chamber around us seemed to glow with affirming light, and I felt my soul expand to accept the weight and the honor of this calling, knowing with unshakable certainty that I would never be the same, that I had been forever marked by grace that came from beyond the stars, yet pointed always toward the same eternal throne where Jesus reigns in glory, where all mysteries find their resolution, and all creation bows in worship of the one who spoke everything into being with a word. The alien stepped back from me and tilted its head in a gesture that seemed almost human, and through the telepathic connection, I felt a shift in the nature of what was being communicated, a deepening of the channel between our minds, as if we were moving from a quiet conversation into something more like a symphony, where multiple instruments would play simultaneously to convey truths too complex for words alone. My companion's eyes held mine with an intensity that was neither invasive nor uncomfortable, but rather felt like being seen completely, every fear and hope and question laid bare before a consciousness that understood the full weight of what it was about to share with me. And I realized, with a tremor of anticipation, that everything up to this moment had been preparation for what was coming now. The being raised both hands in a gesture that reminded me of a priest offering a blessing, and suddenly the entire chamber responded to that movement as holographic displays erupted into existence all around us, no longer showing historical events or technological schematics, but instead projecting images of the cosmos itself in all its staggering immensity. Galaxies spinning in slow spirals of light against the velvet darkness, nebulae glowing with the colors of creation's first morning, star systems beyond counting arranged in patterns that suggested not chaos, but intentional design. Through our connection, the alien spoke directly into my understanding. Bypassing language entirely to convey the central truth, it had crossed the void to help humanity remember that we stood at a crossroads unprecedented in our species' history, a threshold moment when the revelation of life beyond Earth would cease to be speculation and become undeniable reality, and that this revelation would shake millions of souls who had built their faith on foundations too narrow to accommodate the vastness of God's actual creation. I felt tears streaming down my face as the alien showed me vision after vision of people across the earth. Believers who loved Jesus with sincere devotion, but who had unconsciously confined the Almighty to earth-sized thinking, unable to imagine that the God who numbered the hairs on their heads had also scattered life across galaxies like seeds across a field, each civilization a unique expression of divine creativity, each world a different chapter in the same eternal story of a creator pursuing relationship with his creation. The being conveyed to me that humanity's awakening to cosmic citizenship was not a threat to the gospel, but rather its fulfillment on a scale that would magnify Christ's sacrifice beyond anything our theology had dared to imagine. That if Jesus died to reconcile all things to himself, then all things included realities we had not yet encountered, beings we had not yet met, worlds we had not yet named. My companion showed me that people like me, those who had been quietly prepared through experiences that cultivated both unshakable faith and radical openness, were being positioned as bridges to help our brothers and sisters navigate this expansion of understanding without losing their spiritual footing. To testify that the same Jesus who walked the shores of Galilee reigns over every galaxy, that the same Father who sent his Son to earth holds all worlds in his hands with equal tenderness. The alien revealed that a great awakening was beginning, not to replace the truth we had known, but to reveal how much more vast and glorious that truth actually was, and that my role, along with others being activated in this season, was to speak with the authority of first-hand experience, to say with confidence, born from encounter, that we were not alone, that we had never been alone, and that the love of God was more boundless than the universe itself. The holographic cosmos around us shifted, and suddenly I was seeing Earth from a perspective high above the atmosphere. Our blue and green jewels suspended in space, and the alien directed my attention to streams of light that flowed toward the planet from distant points in the heavens, and I understood that these represented other beings, other civilizations, that had been watching and waiting for humanity to reach the maturity necessary to join the greater community of conscious creation. My companion conveyed that this was not invasion, but invitation, not conquest, but collaboration, that we were being welcomed into a fellowship that had always existed under the sovereign authority of the Most High, where diverse peoples from countless worlds united in worship of the One who made them all, and in service to the cosmic purpose of reconciling all things through Christ. The alien showed me that the coming years would be marked by increasing contact, by revelations that would challenge old assumptions and require new frameworks, but that those who had learned to hold faith and wonder together in the same heart would find themselves uniquely equipped to help others navigate the transition, to reassure the frightened, to correct the misguided, and to celebrate with those whose souls expanded with joy at the recognition that God had been more generous in his creative work than we had dared to believe. Through the telepathic link, I felt the being's profound hope for humanity, its confidence that we would rise to meet this moment, not despite our faith, but because of it, that the same Spirit who had guided prophets and apostles through previous paradigm shifts would prove faithful again, and that the witness of transformed lives like mine would become beacons drawing others toward truth that was simultaneously ancient and newly revealed, familiar and breathtakingly fresh. The chamber seemed to pulse with gentle light as the alien conveyed its final message about the crossroads before us, impressing upon my consciousness that the choice facing humanity was not whether to accept the reality of cosmic neighbors, but rather how we would integrate that reality into our understanding of God's nature and purposes, whether we would allow our vision of the divine to expand, or whether we would retreat into fear and denial that would only delay the inevitable while causing unnecessary suffering. My companion showed me that free will remains sacred even in this moment, that no one would be forced into awareness they were not ready to receive, but that those who had been prepared, those whose compassion and curiosity had been cultivated through years of divine orchestration, carried a responsibility to step forward as witnesses and guides, to share what they had seen, not with arrogance, but with the humble authority of one who has encountered mystery and found it pointing always toward the same God who revealed himself most fully in Jesus Christ. The being projected one last image into my mind, a vision of myself standing before crowds of people, speaking words that came not from rehearsed speeches, but from the overflow of this very experience, offering testimony that brought tears of relief and joy to faces that had been twisted with confusion and fear, helping souls find their footing in an expanded universe without losing their grip on the Savior who had always been and would always be the way, the truth, and the life. I understood in that moment that my life had been irrevocably redirected, that the person who had discovered a crash site at dawn no longer existed, replaced by someone who had been entrusted with a message that would define the rest of my days on earth and perhaps beyond. Someone who now carried the responsibility and the privilege of being a bridge between worlds, between heaven and earth, between the faith of our fathers and the cosmic reality of our Father's actual domain. And I accepted that calling with a whispered yes that echoed through the chamber like a vow spoken before the throne of grace itself. The alien stepped toward the crystalline console one final time and pressed its elongated fingers against a panel that responded with a cascade of light. And I watched. As a section of the chamber floor began to shift and reconfigure, geometric plates sliding over one another with perfect precision until a small pedestal rose from the ground before me, and resting on its surface was an object that took my breath away, a crystalline artifact roughly the size of my palm that glowed with soft golden luminescences. If it contained a fragment of the sun itself. My companion lifted the object with both hands in a gesture of profound reverence and turned to face me. And through our telepathic connection, I felt waves of gratitude and something else I could only describe as sacred recognition. As if this being was not merely giving me a gift, but rather entrusting me with something that had been prepared for this exact moment across distances of time and space I could barely comprehend. The alien placed the artifact in my outstretched hands, and I gasped at the warmth that radiated from it. Not the heat of fire, but the gentle warmth of sunlight on skin, of a loving hand placed on a shoulder, of presence that comforted and strengthened simultaneously, and I understood without words that this object was both a tool and a symbol, a reminder of what I had witnessed, and a key that would open doors I had not yet encountered. Through the fading telepathic link, my companion conveyed that others like me around the world were receiving similar tokens, markers of a covenant between heaven and earth that was being renewed and expanded in ways that would unfold across generations. And I felt the weight of responsibility settle on me, not as burden, but as holy calling. The kind of purpose that gives meaning to every breath and transforms ordinary existence into sacred mission. The alien moved toward a far wall of the chamber where symbols I had not noticed before began to illuminate in sequence, forming a pattern that reminded me of constellations arranging themselves into a map. And as the being approached the wall, it became translucent and then simply dissolved into shimmering particles that revealed a corridor beyond, a passage that seemed to extend not through physical space, but through some other dimension where distance operated according to different laws. My companion turned back to face me one last time, and I saw in those extraordinary eyes an emotion that transcended species and culture, a look that communicated goodbye and blessing and hope all woven together, and I found myself stepping forward to close the distance between us, compelled by gratitude that demanded expression, even though I knew no gesture could adequately convey what I felt. The being met me halfway, and we stood face to face, two creatures from different worlds, who had been brought together by a combination of chance and divine orchestration that I would spend the rest of my life trying to understand. And when the alien raised its hand, I instinctively raised mine, and we pressed our palms together in a gesture that felt simultaneously like a handshake and a prayer. Through that final physical contact, a rush of images and emotions flooded my consciousness, showing me glimpses of the being's own world, a place of beauty and complexity where beings gathered in something like worship to honor the Creator they knew by different names, but recognized as the same source, the same love that had breathed life into all things. And I saw that their understanding of Jesus was not identical to mine, but neither was it contradictory. Rather, it was like viewing the same magnificent diamond from a different angle and being awestruck by facets I had never noticed before, while still recognizing the essential nature of the stone itself. The alien withdrew its hand and turned toward the shimmering corridor, and I watched as it walked forward into that impossible space, its form growing less solid with each step until it seemed to be made of light itself. And just before it disappeared completely, I heard or felt or simply knew its final message to me, words that bypassed my ears and wrote themselves directly onto my heart in letters of fire and grace. "You are beloved," the message said. "You have always been beloved, and everything that exists in all the vast creation shares in that belovedness, because the one who made all things made them as expressions of love that cannot help but pour itself out endlessly. And what you call salvation is simply the universe-spanning work of that love reclaiming and restoring everything that has forgotten its true nature as cherished child of the infinite Father. Tell them," the message continued, "tell your brothers and sisters that the gospel is bigger than they imagined, but no less personal. That Jesus is Lord over galaxies they cannot see, but no less present in their daily struggles. That they are part of a story so grand it includes countless worlds, but so intimate that every tear they cry is collected and every prayer they whisper is heard." The alien's form vanished completely, and the shimmering corridor collapsed back into solid wall, and I stood alone in the vast chamber with only the glowing artifact in my hands, and the echoes of Revelation still ringing through my consciousness, but I did not feel abandoned or afraid, because I knew with unshakable certainty that I had been changed at depths I was only beginning to discover. That the compassion I had shown at dawn to a wounded stranger had unlocked something dormant in my soul, exactly as the being had said, and that I was now awake in ways I had not been before, able to see connections between science and scripture that had always existed, but which my limited vision had failed to perceive. I turned toward the passage that would lead me back up through the bunker and eventually to the world above. And as I began to walk, I felt the artifact pulse with gentle warmth in my hands, as if it were a living thing, responding to my thoughts and emotions. And I understood that my life from this moment forward would be divided into before and after, that I could never return to the comfortable smallness of faith that fit neatly into boxes and never challenged assumptions or demanded growth. The climb back through the ancient facility felt different than the descent had been, each step now weighted with purpose and clarity. And when I finally emerged into the sunlight of late afternoon, I stood blinking at a sky that looked simultaneously exactly the same and completely transformed, because I now knew with absolute certainty that beyond that blue dome stretched not empty void, but a creation teeming with life and consciousness, all of it held in the hands of the God who loved the world so much that he gave his only Son. And I understood that the world had always meant more than just earth, that the redemption purchased on Calvary echoed across dimensions we had not yet explored, and that my calling was to help my human family expand their vision of God's goodness to match the actual scope of his creative work. I looked down at the artifact in my hands, and then up at the stars just beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and I whispered a prayer of thanksgiving for the crash site I had discovered, for the wounded being I had helped, for the journey into depths both literal and spiritual, and for the transformation that had prepared me to be a bridge between worlds, a voice testifying that we are not alone. We have never been alone. We are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses that includes not just the saints who have gone before, but the cosmic family we have not yet fully met. And all of it, every particle and planet, every creature and consciousness, all of it, exists within the loving attention of the Father who knows each one by name and calls each one toward home through the saving work of Jesus Christ, whose lordship, I now understood, extended further than human language could express, but whose love remained as personal and immediate as breath itself. How will you respond when the universe proves bigger than your imagination, but God proves even bigger still? Share your thoughts below and subscribe to continue this journey into faith, mystery, and divine truth.